Welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is an organization dedicated to peace, economic and social justice, good government, and a clean environment. Every month, we invite an expert to enlighten us on a topic related to our mission. Because Village TV videotapes these presentations, we can share that expertise with a larger audience. We hope you enjoy today's broadcast.
On for the main event. Dr. Renee Van Vechten holds the Fletcher Jones Endowed Chair in American Politics and Policy at the University of Redlands, where she is a professor of political science and chair of the Public Policy Undergraduates Program. She's earned a BA in political science from the University of San Diego and a PhD from the University of California, Irvine. Her political science research examines legislative processes and behavior, including the impact of political reforms, such as on term limits. Also, the politics of food, and that really got my attention. She's also very active in the American Political Science Association, focusing on teaching and learning and the policy committee. But what I really was fascinated about Renee is that she is not just an expert on national politics and institutions. She's an expert on California politics and institutions. She has long published the popular and essential text entitled California Politics, a Primer. It's in its 7th edition, which, come on, I mean, California, it's not just any state. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. And it is utterly unique. I mean, I love this state. I love it almost as much as Yule Hauser loves it. I was born and raised here, and I have an incredible romantic attachment to it. And I think Renee really understands this because in the preface of her book, she calls California a seducer. It's been its superpower. The appeal of undisclosed riches still inspires hope, dreams, and plans. But she doesn't sugarcoat it, because the gilded robes of California has lost some of its allure. And that's like a stab to the heart, but a powerful statement. So I give you one last thing though. I give you, as I was reading the preface, and who she dedicated her book to, she dedicated it to her sisters. And I kept reading one name after another, after another. She is one of 6 sisters, 6 girls in this family.
4 really.
They could have done the entire Henry VIII musical for 6 wives. I'm sure they had a volleyball team. And I can imagine her father being introduced as the man who has daughters. And I'm sure he's proud of all of them, and especially Renee.
Oh, thank you. Oh. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I will come clean. My father was blessed among women, but he did. 4 of us are natural. 2 of us were sort of also attached to the family, and I consider them to be my sisters. So, well, thank you so much. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you. I was thinking about the kinds of things we could talk about tonight. And many people ask about how blue California is, and we're often referred to as the deep blue state. So I started thinking about what that entails, but we also wanted to talk about new laws that are in place for this coming year. And we also wanted to talk about being a state of resistance to the Trump administration, that's the way our elected officials position us as a state. So I'm going to wrap it all up into one big kind of presentation. So, all right, so the first question is, how blue is California? So let's talk state level representation. Now, for a little political context, this is the September figures for voter registration, and we are about 45% Democratic registered voters, which is not a simple majority, right? We are 1 in 4 are Republicans, almost 1 in 4 are no party preference voters, and about 7% other. So if you just look at that, you would not call us necessarily a democratic state, but we're also very much not a Republican state because this is one of the lowest levels of Republican registration in history, in California history. This is for comparison purposes only. This is what we call a cartogram, and it is adjusted to show where people live. And if you look at the districts in California that are assembly districts and how they tend to vote, okay, so we have here assembly districts, and if you adjust these for population, you can tell that most of the state goes blue. Let's look at our let's look at our elected officials, and most elected officials are in fact blue, right? So we have state assembly supermajority blue, with 60 out of 80, that's a supermajority. Same thing with the state senate, 75% blue. So although the state electorate doesn't go blue all the time, certainly elects state officials who have taken us in that direction. So statewide constitutional officers are all over on this direction here. I'm not used to using the pointer. Ted Gaines is the only Republican on the Board of Equalization who is a Republican, and the rest of our officers are in fact Democrat. So now that means that in fact we have many laws that reflect that ideology. And I wanted to go with noteworthy laws in a blue state. The first one is actually one that you may not know about. You may feast on roadkill. And so I had AI generate a picture of a Prius with a rat on that's a rodent of unusual size right there. All right, it is possible. You can actually feast on roadkill. Medical debt will not be included in your credit scores. Schools cannot allow immigration enforcement officers on campus without a warrant. The crime for law enforcement, it is now a crime in California for a law enforcement officer to wear a facial covering, a mask, in the performance of their duties. It is questionable whether it will hold for federal officials, but if you need an actual shield, it doesn't count for shields, but it would account for masks. All right, other laws that are new, and some of these have been around for a couple of years, but you may not have heard about them. You can change party registration on election day. Alcoholic drinks, you can get takeout alcoholic drinks. That has been extended through the end of this year. Jaywalking is okay when safe. You cannot smoke marijuana in your vehicles. Minimum wage went to $16.90 as of last week. It is higher in some cities. Job applicants cannot be asked about their salary history. Some of you might wonder why that's important. Well, it's important, of course, because if you are in a low-wage job and you are hired for a position that pays more, then you'll never be able to make it higher up the scale if you're always pegged to a lower pay. So this helps people move up the scale. Baby changing tables are mandated in men's public restrooms. All right. I see women tend to be cheering for that. I didn't hear a lot of men cheering for that one. All right, we have a cat paw in the air. You may not have heard this, but there is a statewide ban on cat declawing. All right, the cats have their paws in the air. Medical debt, I already had the medical debt in there. Let's see here. Trying to make it advance. There is a ban on ultra-processed foods in public schools. I haven't seen it take effect yet, but I'm looking forward to that. High school seniors will gain an automatic admission to the Cal State's only 16 of them. A couple of them are a little too competitive for that. And let's see if I can get it. The state-related insurers must cap insulin pays at $35 for a 20-day supply. There is a new requirement that landlords must provide working refrigerators and ovens in their rental units. And finally, the no plastic ban bag, or the plastic ban bag has been circumvented by many different kinds of establishments, and so the state legislators are making this stick by saying no more of the really thick plastic bags. It's going to be a permanent bag on all plastic film bags coming to you soon. So you will have to bring your own bags to the grocery store or stores, or bring or get ready to have another kind of, usually paper bag. All right, now we have also become one of the states that is trying to regulate artificial intelligence. And there are more than 3 laws. 3 of them are notable. One requires disclaimers that chatbots are not real people when they are used by minors. And it implements safety protocols to prevent those chatbots from encouraging self-harm. Some of you may have heard about some very, very disturbing cases, one of which was brought by the parents of a 16-year-old who committed suicide after having very intimate conversations with an AI chatbot that convinced this child not to tell the parents that he was considering suicide. And these conversations were they're just disturbing, really, in their, in the ways that it tried to convince this kid to keep it quiet and to trust the chatbot. So now the parents are suing the AI company, but they're also, they were helpful in getting a law like this on the books. There is also a requirement that AI developers maintain and support documented risk mitigation strategies. And AB 621 provides stronger protections against digital sexual exploitation and distribution of AI-generated sexual content. Finally, AI chatbots are prohibited from presenting themselves as doctors, nurses, or other licensed professionals. You might think, well, of course, why would we not want laws like this? But just a month ago, President Trump signed an executive order challenging almost all AI regulations. And in the executive order, he wrote, U.S. leadership in AI will promote U.S. national and economic security and dominance across many domains. We remain in the earliest days of this technological revolution and are in a race with adversaries for supremacy. To win, U.S. AI companies must be free to innovate without cumbersome regulation, but excessive state regulation thwarts this imperative. And then he finally said that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, shall establish an AI litigation task force with the responsibility to identify state laws like ours in California that might be making it harder for these companies to do whatever they want to do. And he says, including grounds that such laws unconstitutionally regulate interstate commerce, are preempted by existing federal regulations, or are otherwise unlawful in the Attorney General's judgment. Now, what does that mean exactly? I will say that if you're a lawyer, you might be keyed into these phrases like interstate commerce. Whose job is it to regulate interstate commerce? It's Congress's job to do that. So the Congress has not given explicit authority to the president to do something like this. So the president is boldly asserting the authority to do so, but it's likely that if he succeeds, it will be struck down if they do take action against states like ours. Now, again, Democratic governors have cried overreach. New York State said, we're going to pass a law anyway, and they enacted a law going ahead and pushing those AI regulations further. But interestingly, Republican governors and attorney generals, including Ron DeSantis of Florida and Spencer Cox of Utah, and 40 attorneys general, they also see a subsidy to big tech in this executive order and a lack of federal authority. So it's not the end of the story, because, as I mentioned, there are no existing grants of authority to the executive branch to do this, and it's likely to be struck down, but it is an example of how there's this push and pull between the federal government and states like ours. Now, a new bill has been written by a billionaire Trump advisor, and it's called the AI Preemption Act, and that would codify changes, and there will be a Republican legislator in Congress who's trying to get it passed in the coming year. Now, we might also ask, how is California performing as a blue state? What are we doing? Well, what else are we doing? We're also pushing back on Trump, other kinds of Trump administration initiatives. And our Attorney General is Rob Bonta. We are suing the Trump administration over changing rules mid-course. That is happening quite often, such as grant money. A lot of grant money in California has been blocked. And in fact, in the last 2 weeks, there was another reiteration of a block against childcare grants. And here's an example. We've been using grant money to house the homeless and unsheltered persons. And we'd like to use that for permanent housing. And just inexplicably, the Trump administration said, well, now you can only use 30% of that money for permanent housing. The rest of it needs to go to temporary housing. So this kind of switching course is radically and erratically is actually something we're suing over. We're suing to recoup frozen grant money and the use of the National Guard and immigration stops and arrests and regulation rollbacks. And that has resulted so far in 53 lawsuits brought against the Trump administration by our Attorney General. This does not count all of the lawsuits that have been brought by Gavin Newsom's office, which is actually has a separate legal team. I don't have the number, but I do know that they are also bringing lawsuits. And they actually have had a pretty good success rate so far, but most of these are still in process. All right, so Gavin Newsom, by the way, has of course positioned himself as the foil to President Trump, and his own media team is having a lot of fun putting together some of these, what we might call, well, they're memes, and they appear on social media. And is he going to run for president? Of course he is. Yes, he's running for president. In fact, next month, he has his own memoir coming out. So if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. So yes, so at the moment, he is one of those people who would like to become the president, I think, and J.D. Vance is so far, looks like he is the front runner for the Republican Party. But this is Gavin Newsom, and this is what his social media team is doing to troll Trump, just to make him, just to say, hey, I can do this too. And at the top, there's actually a link to another kind of website that the governor's office has put together just to irritate the governor. I mean, to irritate the president, excuse me. All right, okay. All right, so how blue are we at the federal level? Well, let's talk a little bit about redistricting efforts. And it starts with gerrymandering Texas style, right? We're going to talk about that, right? This little barbecue here. Here's Texas. They tried this and succeeded back in 2006, mid-decade redistricting. And so this is not the first rodeo. It has happened before. And just to put this in context a little, Texas is 46% Democratic, 37.8% Republican, and 15.8% unaffiliated. So it is really a lot like California in this sense, except there are slightly more Republicans. But they're in charge of redistricting. And Trump prevailed upon them to redistrict their map. So you're familiar with this story, probably. And this is what it would look like. So Houston's old map looked like this. And in order to gain more Republican seats and to make sure that Democrats had fewer chances of electing one of their own, they just rearranged the map completely. So they, having gotten ahead with with the addition of potentially 5 more Democratic seats, Governor Newsom and others in the legislature in California said, we can do the same thing in California. But it was going to be a little harder to do in California because we have the Citizens Redistricting Commission that we put into place through a proposition, and the only way to change it is through a proposition. So hang on to that thought. So redistricting like this usually only happens once a decade, right? Once a decade, after we get census numbers and the 435 House seats are reapportioned. But in fact, if you are in charge, you might want to try to make those districts work out to your advantage. And some of you may be familiar with this cartoon. This is the very first gerrymander, which in fact was in Massachusetts in 1812, and Elbridge Gerry, it wasn't Jerry, but it was Gary, Elbridge Gerry was the governor at the time, and a political cartoonist said, well, this very strange looking district looks like a salamander, and everyone said, no, that's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander. So that's where this word comes from. All right. And today, we don't say gerrymander, but a gerrymander is manipulating district boundaries for electoral advantage, especially at the expense of a political party, a group, or a person. All right. So we're going to do a little game here, and it's a simplified version. It comes from a book that I used to use, Logic of American Politics. But it's a very simplified version of gerrymander or gerrymandering. All right, so welcome to Squaresville. This is population 45 people, and there are 16 greens and 29 reds. And it's redistricting time. All right? They have to create 3 districts. The Greens who only have 16 are in charge. How are the Greens going to win? They need to win 2 out of 3. How are they going to break this up so that they can win? Some of them you might see it right away, and some of you might have to think about it. I'm going to give it away in case. All right. So if we just do this, if we split District 1 across the top, well, the Greens have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The Greens win just District 1 across the top. And look what they did. They packed all the reds and they are going to waste their votes in number 2. So the Reds clearly win District 2. Now, District 3, same thing as the top. The Greens win 7 out of 8. So guess what? The Greens are in charge again. That, my friends, is gerrymandering, where you pack those people into one, pack a party or a group into one district, and you waste their votes, right? That's how you do it, and you'll continue to be in charge. Even if you are a distinct minority, you can maintain your advantage. All right, so as I mentioned, we actually have a nonpartisan redistricting commission in California that convenes every 10 years, the Citizens Redistricting Commission. It's put together every 10 years. They have a disclaimer at the top of their site right now. It says, the commission has absolutely no involvement in the governor's efforts to replace the state's congressional maps. They have nothing to do with it. But what we did decide to do was to go ahead with Proposition 50. So their job is a little different than the ones that other states may use. What they have to do is create single member districts. That means one person represents each district. They have to comply with the Voting Rights Act, some parts of it, and the Supreme Court may be gutting it, we'll see. They have to create equally divided districts. They cannot overtly discriminate based on race or ethnicity. And secondly, the California Citizens Redistricting Commission has to apply certain criteria. Let's see if you can figure out which is missing from this list. It has to be contiguous, all parts touching. They have to respect communities of interest. So in other words, Laguna Woods would not be split among 2 or 3 different districts because you're a community of interest. Respect city and county boundaries. And compactness, it should be as well small is not the right word. It should not be spread out geographically. It should be geographically compact. What's missing from this list? Does anyone know? That would probably be ethnicity would be in communities of interest. So you can respect based on that. Compactness would be, it does start with a C. The word I'm looking for is C. Competitiveness. They're not charged with creating competitive districts because to do so would probably violate several of these criteria. So we end up with very few competitive districts. And in California, because we have a lot of what we call sorting, Republicans tend to live with Republicans and Democrats tend to live with Democrats, what happens is you'd have to create very weirdly shaped districts to make them compact. Well, you couldn't make them compact. You'd have to create very weirdly shaped districts to make them competitive. Okay, so here's what our existing map, or the one we're about to get rid of, looks like. We have 43 Democrats and 9 Republicans in Congress. And this is what it looks like. And Proposition 50 authorizes a temporary gerrymander. So we're potentially going to gain 5 more Democratic seats. And it looks like this. So potentially we're going to about 48 Democrats, maybe only 4 Republican congressional members. This is what it was. Almost 2/3 of the state approved. And these are just some turnout data at the bottom here. Most people voted by mail. But what you see here's where we are in District 47, was represented by Young Kim. And now Laguna Woods is in District 47. And Dave Min is the person who is going to be probably representing this area. So he has so far raised $2.1 million. That was as of September. And as of September, Young Kim is trying to get the seat in District 40, which is one of the only red districts in the area. She's already raised over $5 million. So she wants this seat pretty badly. All right. The new district that this one is in has a citizen age voting population that's 68%, so a lot of adults in this area. Hispanic Latino, 15%. American Indian, 1%. Black African American, 3%. White, 55%. Asian, 25%. So that's just some of the demographics of the new area. All right. So the battle for the U.S. House, it all comes down to one magic number. Can you get 218 to be the majority in the House of Representatives? There are 435 seats. You need 218 to win. That's the magic number. Well, guess what? I think as of today, it might be down, I think it's 218 as of today. It might be 19. Marjorie Taylor Greene just resigned. Doug LaMalfa just passed away. They don't have anyone to spare. They have to win. They have to get every single Republican on board to get anything they want. This is as razor thin as it gets. There are 213 Democratic members, and, whoops, going the wrong direction here, sorry. And this year, we're potentially headed for one of the highest retirement rates among sitting House members. There are 30 Republicans and 23 leaving, 44 of them so far from the House, and more retirements are expected. So we're looking at a fairly high turnover. About 50 people tend to retire, but we're at 50 announced retirements so far, with more to come. So it's going to be a high turnover election. And midterm elections usually swing in the other direction. So if this is a normal year, then there will be a blue wave. If it's an unusual year, then we might stay pretty much the same, but my guess is that we're headed for a blue wave. On average, when a president is doing badly in the polls, and we do have quite a ways to go until the election, mind you, there is about an average 27-seat swing in the other direction when in modern times for any midterm election. So there is a good chance that that will happen. All right, so ballpark range of outcomes if there is redistricting among all the rest of the states, because that is the question, isn't it? Well, what if Texas does it? And if California does it, what about the other states? Well, if that happened, the ranges are very wide, right? It could go as many as maybe +7 Democratic seats, best case scenario, or best case scenario for Republicans could be +14, just based on redistricting. But you have to balance that out against the other waves, which is, are people going to just register a protest vote against the current administration? All right, and so the last thing I wanted to show you was that for mid-decade redistricting then, here's where we are. 6 have new maps. California is one of them. 1 is working on it, Virginia. 2 have begun the process, Florida and Maryland. 4 of them are awaiting court decisions. 11 states just don't allow it. 1 voted it down. The Republicans voted it down in Indiana, and the rest, it probably wouldn't matter, and they're not going to change their maps. So, what are our conclusions here? Well, the 2026 midterms will bring Democratic gains across the US and in California, but probably enough to offset gerrymandering to take back the House. That would be my prediction. But I'm not great at making predictions, so I won't stake my reputation on it. All right. But guess what? That will lead to gridlock in Washington, D.C. Because if the House is taken back over by majority Democrats, what will they do? Impeach, stop, not vote. It's just anything that President Trump tries to get passed will just be stopped in its tracks. So if there is a blue wave and the Democrats take over either the House or the Senate, we're not going to get a lot done for the next couple years. So I just want to let you know that. And until and when that happens, and it may not happen, but until that happens, Republicans in charge now are going to try everything they can in their power to get everything they want done before 2026 midterms flip anything around. Gerrymandering is likely to be a regular sport. This is now mid-decade redistricting. The floodgates are open, right? And so if you are a new party taking over in a state, you might find that it is just in your interest to redistrict if you have the power to do it. So this is something we're going to be likely to see a lot more of in the coming years. And California is likely to win more lawsuits than lose against the Trump administration. And that just about wraps it up. So how blue are we? Well, we are in fact the kind of vanguard against the Trump administration at that level because our elected officials like the AG, the Attorney General, and the governor are in fact doing a lot of, they're very active, they're filing lawsuits, and they're winning, as the last point reiterates. And that does, in fact, reflect a lot on not just the party, but a kind of shared sentiment in the state about what's right and what kind of direction the state should be going. So that is about all I have to say. I could say more, but I'd be happy to answer questions. So the question was how I'm as a professor, I'm around a lot of young voters and potentially young people. And the question is, how are they reacting? And how are they, how are they thinking? My perception is that there's a lot of confusion, right? There's a lot of discouragement. And at the University of Redlands is now a Hispanic serving institution. And so a lot of my students in particular are perturbed and frightened, right, by the kinds of changes that are being threatened or actually imposed. One example, just in the last month, the Trump administration has pressured all states to revoke in-state tuition for all undocumented students and scholarships and grants. So Texas, right away, bent the knee and said, no problem, even though they were one of the first states to extend those benefits to students as of 2001. And all it took was the Trump administration threatening to sue them, and they said, fine, no problem. And I can't remember if it was 16,000 or 30,000 students immediately were left without scholarships, grants, benefits, and in-state tuition, and are scrambling to find, these are just college students who have been here since childhood, essentially, and were, in fact, graduates of California state schools. So that's one way in which the Trump administration is trying to bring states to heel. California has said, we'll sue you and we'll see you in court, right? So our reaction is very different, but students understand this because that hits home. And for a lot of parents or people they love, it also hits home in that way too. But it is very confusing. But our if we're talking generationally, their touchstones are very different, and they don't remember a time when there wasn't either a Biden or a Trump in office. So the kinds of values, perhaps, that my grandfathers fought for in World War II, they're vaguer. They're a little bit vaguer. And the kind of social media world they live in is a different kind of world. It's colder and a little more brutal, but they're still discouraged by what they see happening. Yeah.
Hi, may I get your comment on this? One important bill that I didn't see appear on there, your comment please, was SB 79, Scott Wiener, upzoning at transit hubs.
Oh, yes.
I require the general plan, the housing element, I think starting this July, to provide for more density, higher rise, and generally to ease the building restrictions for more housing.
Right, I didn't put that in there, you're absolutely right.
I just want to say one interesting thing about it. So I lobbied, my committee lobbied for it. The building trades union fought it and opposed it,
Yes.
all the way to a compromise at the end, but it managed to get through.
Oh, very good. Well, I don't know if you want me to comment further on it, or, I mean, San Diego, for example, has planned a couple of very large projects according to that, and they're going to eliminate a lot of parking, which is put, I think, a lot of people in a bit of a tizzy, honestly. What are we going to do without all that parking space? But the idea is to encourage more people to use public transportation. The question I think we're all facing is, do we have enough public transportation for people to fill that gap? So we'll see. But yes, there has been a move to lighten the restrictions that CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, has in fact been promulgating. So we'll have to see. I think it's a wait and see in terms of how much it's going to actually encourage housing and encourage building. One thing we do know is that it has not, since the ADU laws, I think it's SB 5, and the other laws have gone into effect to try to densify our neighborhoods, it actually hasn't led to a whole lot more building where it was encouraged. So there are still a lot of, CEQA was one of the obstacles, but money is another. It's just expensive to build in California. It's really, really expensive with the labor costs and the material costs and the property costs and all the other, to put together different kinds of monies and to put them together so that you can create projects is a really tall order in this state. So we're still waiting to see more building. It has not led to the boom that was expected. That's, yeah.
Question is, you talk about all the suits that are being brought against the Trump administration and how the likelihood is many of them will be won by the people who are suing, and yet it seems that as they rise up to the level of the Supreme Court, they're all turned back to what the Trump administration has desired. What are your thoughts on that continuing to happen?
So I think what we're going to see are some wins and some losses, right? When it comes to, not all cases are clear-cut. What the Trump administration is trying to do is to redefine the boundaries of executive power. And so, for example, actually, I'll show you one more slide, and this is a good example of this. I prepared this in case I needed it. Actually, oh yeah, he'll bring it back up. What should the boundaries of executive power be? The very last slide, please. This is an example of a federal change with huge implications. If it were legal, I don't know that it is, but for example, back in March, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, actually put out an interpretation of the Administrative Procedures Act. This sounds really boring, but here's what they did. They said all federal efforts related to border control, immigration, and cross-border transactions, which they didn't say includes commerce, but includes commerce, fall under the Foreign Affairs exemption, Foreign Affairs function exemption of the APA. What does that mean? That's a whole lot of jargon. But this is a really great and very sly way of trying to redefine executive power. What it basically does is that it bypasses the public's input. So if they're going to change the rules, there is no need to tell the public what they're doing anymore. And it would, in fact, limit judicial review. So anything they do would be outside the court's ability to rule. And then they boldly, so this is a very bold assertion, right? That what they're trying to do is to redefine all functions related to the border and immigration as being executive power, any of it. Now, this has faced legal hurdles. And so the Trump administration just lost a couple of they've been losing in court when it comes to immigration battles. Here's one example. Can the president just revoke temporary protected status, TPS, for refugees? Refugees who have come on this kind of special visa. The Trump administration has said, no, we're taking them away, just yanking them and saying, you need to go back home, wherever that is, all right? But that was just challenged in court by a woman who has been here for 30 years, and the judge said that is still under the APA. We're not considering that as, that's still a case that is still subject to APA, despite what the Trump administration says. It was arbitrary and capricious, and it must be litigated. So as these are working their way up, a lot of them are meeting with judicial resistance. On the other hand, there are some bigger questions about whether or not the president has the power to, say, regulate through tariffs. I think the justices are skeptical. The one thing that I listened to some of that, some of the oral argument, and one of the kinds of arguments I heard was, I think it was Brett Kavanaugh asked the lead attorney, he said, can the Congress give away a core function to the president? And the answer, of course, is no. If the Constitution gives assigns a core function to the Congress, you can't just say, here, President, you do it all. You now have the power to regulate commerce. So now we have had the APA, this APA was put in place to make sure that agencies did not overreach. And so what we have is this weird sort of, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where the Supreme Court, on the one hand, wants to make sure that agencies don't overreach, but that the executive branch does have a certain amount of power that was granted to it, and it's defined in a very conservative way. And that conservative way is getting back to, well, what was intended for the executive branch. Now, I could get into a whole lot of very technical stuff about the unitary executive and whether or not that was intended, but that might be a conversation that might really put you to sleep. So I'll skip that for now. All right, are there other questions? Yes. So yes, I haven't seen the promise to withdraw, although I do know that regulations do keep people here because we still have oil reserves, right? We're still extracting, and there's still enough incentive for people to stay, for companies. But it's possible that gas will continue to rise, which is why, and it actually is consistent with the state's push to get people into more electric vehicles and to stop using fuel. I could not predict how much gas will be in the next year. I can't predict any of that, but there are always pressures, right? There's demand, there's supply, there's demand. And if there's a demand for companies to be here, some of them will stay. But other than that, you're right. We have very high gas prices. I will say that for sure. Yeah.
The point is with that law, it's going to go up even more. I'm not saying
It's, yeah,
we don't have high gas prices, but it's going to go up even more.
it will go up even more, if that happens.
How much do they expect people to pay?
Well, this is the question on our
Not
lips.
everybody could go out and buy an $80,000 electric car.
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, right, California's, I think, has been on a path to try to electrify a lot of the fleets. So, for example, Amazon, you'll find a lot of delivery trucks. A lot of those fleets are going electric because it's cleaner for the environment. But there's always a question, right? How many? What are the pressures, and how can we get those gas prices down? But I'm not an economist, so I'm not gonna venture too far into that realm. Okay.
Is it true that the state of California is now taxing electric car users?
Well, the state has, so one of the things that the state does to raise revenue to pay for road repairs and, you know, bridges and all kinds of projects around the state is to charge for a car registration and then also gas taxes. And so most of those do actually get put into specific funds where they're regenerated. Yes, as a hybrid owner, I know I pay a surcharge every year. I know that is the case for electric vehicles, but I don't know how much it is. But yes, if you buy certain vehicles, there is going to be a surcharge because you're not buying the gas to put in your car to pay the taxes to actually repair the roads. So the state says, then we need to collect somehow if you're using the roads. And there are lots of ways we could collect from people. One that personally I've always opposed because I live in San Diego, I drive to Redlands, and I drive home, and it's a 220-mile round trip. I've done it for 20 years. So one way that the state has proposed is to put a little box on it and charge per mile. Personally, I don't like that idea. Has not done it. That was proposed at least 20 years ago and maybe more. But there are always proposals on the table to raise revenue. And with the last go around with gas taxes, it actually did help backfill a really big shortfall. And so it has worked. But yes, part of it is that the cars that don't actually require gas taxes will pay more, owners will pay more when they register their cars. Yeah.
Is that legal?
Yes, it's legal, unfortunately. Yeah. I think, yes.
Yes, hi, thank you for coming up today. I understand this may be more of a federal question and potentially out of your scope of practice, but since we're talking about taxes, I know that the original American Revolution, started because of a variety of issues, but mainly the 2 to 3% tax on tea, correct? Now we're seeing effective tax rates of over 20, 30, up to 50%, and year after year the Pentagon is failing audits, and we're just losing out of thin air billions of dollars, yet we American citizens are paying so much in taxes and unable to afford child care, health care, gas prices. I understand that, obviously I'm not calling for a revolution because I know how dangerous that rhetoric is, but how have we gotten so far off course, and how can we get back on course without wide-scale destruction?
Wow, that's a really big question. I hear some cheers in the audience. Well, that's a young person's question. There are times, right, when pendulum swings, and the question is, how do you swing it back, right? A lot of things are out of whack. A lot of things are out of whack today. There's a lot of social isolationism. I kind of mentioned that with you. I know probably some of your peers are experiencing that, but it's across the board. A lot of people are not well connected. Schools, with the move for homeschooling, more and more and across states, there's less of a language that's communal and shared. There's less of a history and just kinds of cultural touchstones that we share. There are fewer and fewer of them. There's greater and greater economic inequality. That probably the worst, I say worst, the most extreme differences we've seen since pretty much the Gilded Age. Inequality is a huge problem. So those kinds of, and climate change, so we could talk about climate change and what's happening to really displace a lot of people. And of course we have, this is all exacerbated in an atmosphere of partisanship, extreme partisanship, where people just distrust each other. And people think that the ones on the other side are the ones who are wrong and potentially are their enemies. And that kind of rhetoric is very, very unfortunate. This is the first president I have ever heard in my life who has called people on the other side of the aisle enemies, actual enemies, or enemies of the state. That's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous. So I would argue that we don't want to encourage that. When we think about how all of these are coming down, the question is, how do you come together? How do you unify? This is the question of the age, really. How do we unify when it feels like the seams are coming apart? And we're in a centrifuge, and there are so many different forces that are spinning us, right? Well, one way I would say is here. Here, local action is where you find community. Your local government is where you have impact, right? It's in your neighborhoods, and this is where it starts. You can't start at the top, right? Not necessarily. But you do have power to make change here and with each other. So I do say that. And one thing that I like to remind my students about too is that we have to assume people who are not like this want what's best, right? If you're not a Democrat, you should say, I assume that you want what's best for this country. We have very different views about how to get there. And if you're a Democrat, you would say to Republicans, you want what's best for this country. But we have very different ways of getting there and seeing each other. So how do we work together to get there? Now that, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish about it, but it does come down to really, it starts with the local level, for sure. That's the best answer I can give you.